Hey there, everyone. It's Sober Steve, the podcast guy, here today with 1,117 days sober. And I am so grateful for all the amazing activities that have been going on in Sarasota right now in my local community for Pride this month. It has been an amazing Pride. I've been very social and I love being able to do it all sober, which is something in the past, even a couple years ago, while I was still relatively new in sobriety, I was worried about going out to events like this where there was alcohol involved or things like that. But I work an awesome program, have amazing fellows, have a great community in all of you. And now I'm getting able to do all these amazing, wonderful things each weekend in my community, and I love it. So thank you for that. I'm grateful for you being a part of my strength and courage to be able to get out there. And I am very excited to share with you my interview today that I did with Johnny Bear from the Belly Talk pod. I am so glad that we connected. And I hope as I reach out to his co host, there's even a little bit of a cross promotion going on. So if you love this episode, make sure you go check out Bear Talk. And if you do, make sure you reach out to their hosts and say, like, Johnny Bear, we loved you on Gay A. And Coach Cub, make sure you have Steve on your podcast because we want to hear more of him talking about his bear things. So, with that, though, I will let you check out the interview. It is a great one. So, enjoy. And I do my little outro at the end of that as well. So, thank you, everyone, as always, for making sure that you tell your friends who are sober that might be able to get something out of this podcast to go check it out wherever they find podcasts or help them find it even better because sometimes people don't know how to find podcasts. So help your friend who's sober or looking to get sober or sober curious find the podcast. Enjoy the interview and stay sober, friends. Hey there, it's your host Steve here with Johnny.
Hey, Steve.
I had the pleasure of connecting with you through Instagram, and you are a fellow podcaster. But why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. I'm Johnny. I go by Johnny Bear. I do co-host a podcast called Belly Talk, which is about bear wellness in the bear community. And yes, I live a sober life. Thank goodness. It's been a long, long, windy road, but I'm very thankful and grateful to be here in this moment with you.
Excellent. And speaking of gratitude, what would you say would be one or two items on your gratitude list today?
Oh, today for sure. Even though we're in the middle of a heat wave, the ability to be able to go out, have a place to live, have a car, go out and get what I need to get, come back to air conditioning. You know, it's easy to take all that for granted. But to have the means and the resources and the life that I have now compared to what it used to be like, that was where I was focused on my gratitude this morning.
That's excellent. And in addition to that, not only is this, I mean, it's Pride every single episode here, but it's also, we are in the middle of Pride Month. What's your favorite part of being a member of the queer and gay community today?
Oh my goodness. The most beautiful thing for me right now is being part of community. I recently moved up to Northeast up here in upstate New York near Woodstock, New York, in a town called Kingston. And it's such a thriving gay mecca, you know? It's like P-Town in the mountains. And I volunteer for the local LGBT center. And this weekend I was able to be a part of a community project to paint the flags, the rainbow flags and the trans flags in the crosswalk of downtown or uptown Kingston. And I was standing there painting early in the morning and I was just like, oh my God, look at all these beautiful people and all these young children and parents. And it was just, I said, God, I'm so blessed to be a part of community. So I think that's the main crux of this year's celebration.
That's wonderful. I love that. Community is so important. And I was really blessed early on with starting this podcast right away that I kind of had a virtual community and then my sober community. But being able to build one recently in real life has also been a game changer. So I can definitely relate to that.
Absolutely.
And why don't we jump right into it then? Share a little bit about what your life and journey to where you are today was like in terms of drugs, alcohol, and sobriety.
Sure. I'll tell you the story. And by no means, by me telling you this story is some of the things I'll share were pretty traumatic and I'm going to share it from a place of storytelling. So I really might not, I probably won't get into a lot of the emotionality of it, but by no means do I want your listeners to feel like it wasn't an emotional challenge at all because it's still a daily practice for me. But for now, I'll just share the story and lay the groundwork. When I was born, literally, I was born with my eyes sealed and I had a cleft lip and palate and I had a hernia and I had a couple other challenges physically. So I had this notion in my head growing up because I had surgery all the time. Every summer, pretty much throughout my teens, I was having reconstructive surgery. And somehow I got this theme in my head that I was born to be fixed, which means that I was broken because nobody that I knew looked like me or had the issues that I had. And that was a great challenge. And it started me off on a path of pretty much low self esteem and depression. And when my dad left when I was 5, set me off even more. So pretty much around my teenage years is when I found the drugs, marijuana, basically, which was my gateway. And it was so easily accessible because my father and stepmother smoked weed all the time. It was the late 70s, so early 80s. So it wasn't that unheard of at that time, but I had easy access. So I just started smoking weed. Boy, did life change. I finally felt like all the pain and suffering internally was just up smoke. And eventually, unfortunately, things graduated as I got older. Pills got involved, and I it was right around the years crack was introduced to the world in the mid 80s. So I was dabbling in that. And then I was lacing my weed with heroin, and then I was selling angel dust and smoking it. And eventually it turned into cocaine use. And that was m- my driving force. Everything in my life became all about getting coke and maintaining a lifestyle. So any little jobs I had, I wound up losing. But I dropped out of high school in my senior year so I could work, so I can get high. And unfortunately, the adults around me didn't have much presence with me in life. They kind of always left me out there on my own to go through stuff, even though I lived with them, my mother and my stepfather. God bless them. They're great providers, but emotionally, they just weren't there. So at the age of 19, I was now really in deep and I was getting high all alone. I was traveling to the South Bronx, which, if none of your listeners know, is a really terrible, terrible part of New York. And I've had guns put to the side of my head, messing with me. And then one evening, it probably was 3 in the morning, and I had just sold a piece of jewelry that I had stole from my grandmother. And I wound up getting sexually assaulted by two drug dealers, two men. And it was, looking back now, it was brutal. Back then, all I wanted to do literally was get my drugs and get out. And that was my focus the whole time. But I eventually got out and did an 8 ball on my way home in the car on the side of the highway. Between the attack and the 8 ball, one of the times where I just and angels were looking over me because it was my body. What my body went through was pretty horrific. That kind of ended my run for hard drugs at that time. There was no way I was going back down, and I had to heal. My body was in pretty bad shape, and nobody really paid attention. They just figured I was so good at avoiding attention from anybody. Growing up with the face that I had, I learned how to live in the shadows. And that was kind of like my apparatus and within my whole life was just living in the shadow. So I could get away with a lot of stuff. Unfortunately for me, that was one way that I got through that time. But after that, I continued to smoke weed and whatnot. And when I was 20, and that, mind you, I wasn't out yet. I didn't even know about sexuality. I had no idea who I was. I just knew getting high was my life. But at the time, I was with a girl, a steady girlfriend, and she wound up getting pregnant. And my daughter died on the day of her birth, which was when I was 20, 21 years old. So, in that week, I was I was such a fixer and such a caretaker of people that I asked her to marry me while we were in the hospital. So we got married. Samantha, my daughter, died in June, and we were married in October. And then our son was conceived in December and born the following September. And then we split the following September. It was such, it sounds like as I'm speaking it just sounds so crazy because it was. And all through that time, I was smoking weed on the side and drinking a bit. But at that point in my life, I wasn't a major drinker, but it helped to take the edge off of everything I was going through. And so here we are. We split. I moved back in with my parents. I'm 20. I had my first kind of nervous breakdown and I found a therapist who I had to happen to be a nun. My family was very involved in church, so I got very involved in everything Catholic. All my energy and time shifted from getting high to being a raving fanatic of faith, which I'm not knocking some people it works, of course, but it did lay groundwork for later years in my life for my spiritual journey. But it wasn't for me because during that time, I began to realize that there was something going on that I started to look at guys a little differently. And I think because I started to identify and discover who I was after all these years. Like there was a sense of identity that I never had. So now I'm a single dad, pretty much raising my son with the help of my parents because his mom, my ex-wife, she was 18, so she was needing to live her life the way she needed to. So it was pretty much here I was now growing up with this child. I needed to be there for him. These parts of me started peeking out. So I began to explore my sexuality and boom, it was like the lights went on. It was the summer of 1994 and it was the 25th anniversary of Stonewall and the gay games were in Manhattan. I was out. It was unbelievable. It was the beginning of my Renaissance period. From 25 to 30, I had like this great awakening. I went back to school because I had dropped out. So I went back to got my GED. I started to go to college and I got my associate's degree and then my bachelor's degree and then my master's degree. And this coming from somebody who was considered himself really, really stupid because of there was no self-esteem. And I started to attend the LGBT center locally and making friends and just life was good. For the first time ever, life was good. And then I was 29 going on 30 and I met someone and he was everything you could imagine you would want a partner to be. he was beautiful, and he was a dancer, and he was an educator, and he was smart, everything. So I fell, and I fell hard and quick. And we spent the next 10 years together. And throughout the 10 years, his true colors emerged early on, and he was an abuser. And psychologically, emotionally at first, and then physically and sexually, making me attend various horrible sex parties. And it was just everything that I had gained over the previous 5 years had just gone. So I started drinking a lot, cope. I realized probably in the fifth year, the more I was drinking, the more license I think he had to do more of his dirty deeds, if you want to call it that. When we went out or whenever we went anywhere, I was always at the bar right away. And he was off doing his thing. And it was a really tough time. I was still a dad, and I was working now. I was a social worker of all things, helping people during the day with their issues, and living at night this double life of the complete opposite of everything I was trying to help people do, was to reclaim their own lives. And unfortunately that lasted 10 years. And eventually during that 10 years, after one night of a terrible beating, I realized I never fought back. And I'm, I'm a big guy. Back then I was close to 300 pounds because I was eating a lot as well. So, and he was maybe 5'9" and 130 pounds wet. I mean, here I was, this big guy, but I never fought back because I always understood his issues. I always understood it's from his past, and I'm a social worker, and I could fix this if I could just find the right way. So it was one night after a pretty terrible beating that I realized I wanted to fight back, but I was too drunk to fight. I my motor skills were crazy and crazy dull, and I just remember laying there, and he had dumped all I had started seeing a psychiatrist, and he had dumped all my medication all over the hardwood floors and threw me down in it. So I was laying there, and I said, something, you got to do something here. Something's got to change. You can't live this." And none of this was ever in front of me, thank God. But later on, I found out that he knew he had a vibe, as kids do. But it was then I started to explore AA and NA, just any kind of A, and OA I went to as well, because I was before I would go home at night, I would be stopping at McDonald's and getting 3 Big Macs and eating them as one sandwich just to insulate enough to be able to go home and deal with whatever version of him I was dealing with. So I got a lot of education through those meetings, but it nothing really gave me tools, but I wasn't ready. I just wasn't there. And eventually, on the around the 10th year of our relationship, I found somebody who kind of had an interest in me and started to build up my self-esteem. And I wound up learning to fall back in love with myself. And once I did that, I looked at him, my ex-husband, and I said, "No more. It's no more. I can't." I think he went to raise his hand to me, and I just put my hand up, and I grabbed his wrist, and and now, I tell you I'm much stronger, and I pushed him down. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing? You're abusing me." "What?" It was. It was so crazy. And I said, it's over. So we wound up, unfortunately, living together for 6 more months, which was torturous. But I remember it was the summer of the Twilight books. So I was able to read those books all summer and avoid him as much as I could. And then from the age 40, because now I'm 40 years old, to 47, I started to try to figure out what went wrong, how I could live a better life. But I still wasn't identifying any real core issues. I just figured this was all, since I had such insight as a social worker, I had a PhD in myself and, I was going from different therapists and trying to figure it all out and keeping things on the surface as, you know, because I knew why I was doing what I was doing, but I was trying to break the behaviors. And at that time I was not drinking anymore, still smoking a little bit of weed. And then unfortunately I binged on coke one weekend and I had a massive nosebleed and went to the hospital, and all the reconstruction I had done on my nose as a child was started to really, it took its toll that last weekend. And the doctor told me, if you ever do this again, not only could you die, but your face could collapse. So that was that. And I started reading the big book just to keep keep it fresh in my head. And then now I'm winding down the story. So now I'm 47. I went to culinary school when I was 45 just to reboot my life and try to start a new career. I've always had a passion for food. And I graduated from a culinary school in Manhattan within a year. And I started working in high end restaurants and did this working 16, 17-hour days for 2.5 years. And as an older person in the kitchen, it, it, it not probably not the best place for somebody my age at that point. And I wound up burning out physically. And I said, all right, I need to take a break. And when I was home for a couple of months, it was the dead of winter out on the island, but so it's pretty quiet. And I started to have like these flashes of, I was sitting on the toilet, and sorry if it's gross, but I started seeing blood in the toilet, and I would get up and I would turn back around. There was no blood in the toilet. And things like that started happening more and more. And I really thought I was going crazy. I started hearing voices, a lot of Spanish voices that weren't, there was no Spanish people around, but I was hearing that. I was having horrific dreams that people were breaking into my house. I called 911 one night because I thought somebody was in my house. It was slowly but surely, probably for 3 months, driving me really nuts, to the point where I attempted to take my life. And fortunately, that didn't work out. But the next day, I went and I sought help, and they set up a program for me. It was like inpatient without walls. So I had like 5 different people I was responsible to see and talk to on a weekly basis. So from 47 to now I'm 55, my life really, I really began to live it's been a really amazing life. So anyway, I'm gonna stop talking a little bit in case you have some questions.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for being so vulnerable with sharing all of that. I know that we all have different experiences through life, but so many of us that find our way into the rooms eventually can say like they had a childhood or a young adulthood or teen experiences that were very much like, of course I drink, of course I do drugs. Look at these things I've been through, where you get kind of this resume of the traumatic, fucked up shit that's happened to us. And we use it as a reason like why to stay in our situation rather than why to get out of it. So what advice would you say to someone who's trying to like get out of it and like is ready to make that change or to make that adjustment to try and start their sobriety.
Well,
Or
that that's the beauty of where I'm at now and where I started at 47 was seeking help, asking for help. And you know what? If you don't want to see a therapist or, a psychiatrist, go to a meeting, get online. If you don't want to be out around people, there's so many resources on the internet now. It's unbelievable. Do something virtual, read a book. Anybody that is, I call them good news people that you could find to surround yourself with, do that because it's so vital to have feedback from another person because we need to get out of our own heads. Even though we're doing the work and we really have the best intentions for ourselves, the to get that kind of feedback from somebody else, it makes such a difference and it really helps reaffirm your path. Sure.
thank you. And what would you say are some sober practices that you keep in your life that helped you get sober that you still do today all the time later?
It's amazing because even though the last thing I would really want to do is get high or drunk, there are times where I'm in situations now because I'm so involved in different communities. And I remember last year going to a bear retreat in Portugal. And a lot of those evenings, we went to the bars and there were a lot of opportunity. And I, I, it was almost like a automatic reflex to want to go to the bar or want to go to the bathroom and pick up something that was available. But what I did first had the realization that this is just an automatic response. So I could rely on my mental health toolbox, everything that I built up, all my tools and utilize them. So I took myself out of the situation and graciously said goodbye. And I took a long walk and then I had my room and journaled for most of the which is such a expressive way for me to work through whatever feelings. I journal without judgment, so I do a lot of writing. I also am a voyeur, so I go out and just watch the world in the present moment and embrace a lot with the eyes of gratitude.
I love that. The eyes of gratitude. Yeah, you're so colorful with your words. I love the turns of phrases that you use. As you share, like you not only have your sober communities, which I love, we all need them because there are safe sober spaces, but you also venture out into the bear community. I'm sure many of my listeners have been like, "Ooh, a podcast about bears, bear talk." Like, tell me more about how you've navigated and maintained your sobriety and kept true to that part of you while you're in these groups that oftentimes are very drug or alcohol fueled.
Yeah, part of what part of yeah, I mentioned earlier, or we mentioned earlier that I'm co-host podcast. That podcast is a direct result of creating a different avenue for the bear culture to express and explore wellness. So it's a platform that my my partner in crime, my co-host, he's built a community. His name is Coach Cub. He's built the belly community and that he hosts alcohol-free events and classes and yoga classes and cuddle and dances and retreats away. So that's really encouraged. So we meet once a week. We do podcasts, people just to talk about wellness and what it's like to have an alternative bear universe to give options to people like me and others out there. So that's a huge component to me staying engaged with our community, yet staying true to needs and my
Yeah, that's awesome. I give you so much props, like working with him on like, I oftentimes find like when you find two things that you love, like for your case, the sobriety, your community there, and the belly talk in the community there, like being able to merge them together with those types of events. It's always fun when you find that both of your niches actually have some overlay as well, where people are like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
What would you say is one thing you've learned about yourself or that's helped you grow in your sobriety from the podcast?
Well, speaking my truth, for the most part, utilizing my voice and realizing that I don't just talk my talk in my head, but I literally walk my walk as well in life. And having a platform where I'm sharing so authentically and with an open heart and an open mind and hearing the words come out of my mouth and then having it play back afterwards when I listen to, I'm like, oh, you really know your shit. I mean, you've really been through it and you really, you really have a lot to say. And and coming from a lifetime of not having any sort of identity, a foundation within myself, the past 8 years, learning that I have this beautiful voice, these beautiful stories to share and to be able to give back. I think that's part of my love language is giving back. And so that in and of itself is the greatest gift that I've gotten so far.
Excellent. So, bears or people interested in learning more about the bear community, check out Belly Talk.
Yeah.
It's out wherever you listen to this podcast. I'm sure you can find their podcast as well. Great SEO, so it'll pop up right away when you type it in.
Yeah.
And Johnny, how can people connect with you if they resonate and want to thank you for sharing your message so boldly or connect more one-on-one?
Oh, sure. I'm on Instagram mostly. It's real Johnny Bear 69 at, Instagram. And the 69 is my birth year, a sexual thing.
I'm
Uh,
sure that people will think of both all the time constantly. So we're like
yeah.
either or, who knows?
Yeah. Also, my Facebook group is also the Belly Talk Facebook group, so you could always reach out and join in there. It's a buffet of positivity.
Excellent. Sounds good. I'll link over to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on and joining the Gay A family. We'll have to have you back on for a topic episode to talk more about bear culture sometime.
Yay. Thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate the work you do.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another great episode of Gay A. Make sure you follow Johnny. See you all next week. Stay sober.